pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the weekend edition here on Point of View, and so grateful that you could join us. Over the next 2 hours, going to spend some time really talking about a number of different issues. And if you'd like to join us, we could perhaps open up the phones, but I suspect most of you, as you oftentimes like to do on Friday, sit back, take some notes, and find many of the articles we have posted. We first of all have Keisha Russell with us today, and she is an author. Might mention her book, and we're going to get back to it a little bit later, Uncommon Courage. She's also, of course, a speaker and senior counsel at First Liberty Institute. And Keisha, it is great to see your face once again, since you've been working with, I think it was Judge Ho, haven't you?
Yeah, it's just a pleasure to be back.
It is great to see her here. And of course, we also have Liberty McArtor, who of course is a co-host as well as the host of the Know Why podcast, an individual that is also a writer, and always good to see you.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
I might just mention, too, this is, except for me, an all-female cast, because two very intelligent women on this side of the glass, two very competent women on the other side, Megan Henderson and Megan Kitchen. So, again, I'm the only guy around here today, but I am so grateful for all of you that are participating. But, Keisha, let me come to you first. One of the cases we've encouraged people to pray about is where the oral arguments are going to be heard on December 3rd. So that's coming around just the corner here. And it's this evangelist who is from Mississippi. And in some respects, this is another one of those very important religious liberty cases, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. You know, Gabe Olivier is a street evangelist. He was evangelizing in a public park in Mississippi, and he was cited for an ordinance that doesn't allow him to do that. Now, the ordinance is unconstitutional in our position. But the issue is that when he was cited, it was a criminal violation. And so he pled no contest to that. And there is a doctrine in the law called the heck bar. And when you plead guilty, or when you're considered guilty to something, you cannot then sue civilly for that problem. And so that is the sort of issue that Gabe Olivier has been entangled in right now. So that's what we're trying to get the Supreme Court to weigh in on. So can he still sue and say this ordinance is unconstitutional, even though he's already been convicted?
And again, if you think about the ordinance being unconstitutional, I don't remember the founders saying, well, you have free speech, but only in certain designated locations, only places where when you're not saying something controversial. There's no disclaimer on the First Amendment in that regard. But the other part of that, I don't want to get into the weeds too much, but I think that idea came up because we had individuals that were in jail using this abuse of being able to sue all of the time. This is different, where he was just simply saying, look, I'll plead guilty so then I can have my day in court. But as soon as you plead guilty, then he doesn't have his day in court. And that doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't. And it's a doctrine, I think, that needs some fixing. Ultimately, what you want to look at is whether the person is asking for prospective relief. That means future. Yeah. That means, do they want to say, okay, this ordinance is unconstitutional, we will no longer enforce it, rather than trying to get, relief for what has already happened. So that's the biggest difference in this case. And I think the Supreme Court will see that.
I think so. Liberty, one of the things that always encourages me about having people here from First Liberty is, if I've done my counting wrong, I think we got like 9 Supreme Court cases. They won all 9. Won the most recent one 9-0. I got a feeling they're going to win this one as well. And it's just a good illustration of the fact that we are enjoying right now more religious freedom and religious liberty than many people on the listening audience have ever experienced.
Yes, and I'm so grateful for First Liberty. And I think that, we can praise God for the victories right now, but I'm sure, as you would affirm, Keisha, never let our guard down. And reading about Gabe's case, it reminded me of things you hear about in the UK right now. For instance, the woman who was arrested multiple times for praying outside of an abortion facility, praying silently, by the way. But she was just standing in the wrong place, and she was silently, praying. And that sounds so ridiculous, but it's happening. And if it's not for protections of our First Amendment right, then I feel like we could go that way very easily, which is why, again, I'm just so grateful that First Liberty is there defending these rights, and we have to all be vigilant.
Yes. I also put a second one up there, Keisha, and that is we've been encouraging people to pray about this case, which was Cambridge. And this was two Christian schools in a playoff, and yet they were told in the state of Florida that you couldn't pray over the loudspeaker. And you would think that that would have been one the Supreme Court took, but maybe there's some other issues going on.
Yeah, so we're not sure exactly why the court didn't take it. We know that just because the court doesn't take a case, it doesn't mean that they agree with the lower court decision. But there are all sorts of reasons why they may not have taken it. So we are disappointed about that. But we, as always, we persevere. And if any other issues like this arise in Florida, of course, we will take it up. The other thing is the government in Florida is totally different than it was when we started this case. Florida was purple when this case started, and it is decisively red now.
Yeah, and that might be part of it. Yeah, maybe it doesn't need to get any kind of judicial remedy, but it's just one of those cases that I thought I might mention because we're in the midst of playoffs. I was telling some of you some playoff games I'm going to be watching, and nevertheless, this just is a good example of how when not so long ago there were some people saying, well, this is a secular stadium and it's a secular microphone, even though it's the old Orange Bowl where Billy Graham did an evangelistic outreach, but nevertheless, they say you were barred from having a prayer over the loudspeaker. And when they were two Christian groups, Liberty, I just think this one's sort of intuitively obvious, but somehow it wasn't obvious to some of the officials there.
Maybe we need to have microphones that are labeled Christian microphone, and if they brought their own, then would it not be the government microphone?
Right.
So yeah, just seems a little bit ridiculous.
Well, if nothing else, just before we do take our first break there, Keisha, I thought I'd mention now what I always like to do at the end, but I know some people tune in and tune out, and that is right now we're going to have Christmas parties, and we're going to have students told that they can't talk about Jesus or they can't have maybe a speech on that. Pretty soon we're going to be eventually talking about graduation and whether or not valedictorians can mention Jesus, and even some of these football games, whether or not they can have a prayer before the game, even after we've had Coach Kennedy and all the rest ruled favorably. So if people run into some questions, it really gets back to the title of your book, because you were always talking about these people that had uncommon courage and were willing to speak up for their religious liberty. And they can contact you at First Liberty, can't they?
Yeah, they can. And, as a former teacher, I end up representing a lot of our students and teachers. I recently represented 2 students in high school who wanted to put scripture on their parking spaces, Sabrina Steffens and Sophia Shoemaker. And thankfully, we were able to win both of those with just a demand letter. So that was an amazing situation. But we know it happens all the time. For every one student who's willing to stand up for themselves and who does, there's probably hundreds that don't. And so it's really important to get the word out and make sure that people know they don't have to just take it when someone is violating the constitutional rights. They can go to firstliberty.org and we will be there.
If you click on her picture, you will see it takes you to firstliberty.org. As a matter of fact, one of the cases there is about a teacher in Connecticut dealing with those issues, and a variety of other cases that Keisha and others have been involved with. So that is there. And if you right now say, wait a minute, this same thing happened in my school, well, they're just a phone call away or a click on a website away to get some remedy. We're going to take a break. We have a lot more to cover. We'll do that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
On my radio program the other day, I provided a good news, bad news story. The good news is the youngest generations, that would be millennials and Gen Z, are reading the Bible. The bad news is they don't always believe what they are reading is accurate. The statistics come from the State of the Church Initiative and were recently reported by Leonardo Blair in the Christian Post. Interviews with over 12,000 were conducted online. they discovered that approximately 50% of self-identified Christians report reading the Bible weekly. This is the highest level of Bible reading among Christians in more than a decade. Dave Kinnaman is the CEO of Barna Group and has observed that people aren't just curious about faith, they're opening Scripture for themselves. This trend aligns with other signs of renewal, which we've seen in our research, like growing commitments to Jesus and increased church attendance. Women traditionally have been more likely to read the Bible weekly, but the latest data shows that more younger men are reading the Bible than younger women. It's also worth mentioning that nearly 40% of young adult Gen Z women now identify as religiously unaffiliated. While we can applaud the fact that so many are reading the Bible, we must also deal with the fact that fewer maintain that the Bible is 100% accurate. 25 years ago, 43% of Americans thought the Bible was completely accurate. Today, that percentage has slipped to 36%. Even among self-identified Christians, less than half strongly affirm the accuracy of the Bible. This disconnect illustrates why we not only need to teach the Bible, but we need to teach Christians why it is true by pointing to an abundance of evidence that confirms the Bible. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
This article right now is one that I thought fit very well with our two guests, both of whom are educators, both of whom one has worked with First Liberty Institute, one works at First Liberty Institute, and I thought it was quite interesting that you now have the Supreme Court Justice, Neil Gorsuch, who has warned that civic education in America is its greatest danger. Now, if you've seen some of my commentaries, I've pointed out how few Americans could actually pass the citizenship test that we require non-Americans to pass in order to become a naturalized citizen. And last time I looked, you only needed a 60% on the citizenship test to pass. Where were those teachers when I was in school? And yet still, half of Americans cannot pass that. Most Americans, he says, cannot name the three branches of government. And it reminded me very much, Keisha, of your book, because you have a whole section, first of all, on the whole idea of Christianity and the Constitution. You talk about the whole issue of education, having been a former teacher before you became a lawyer. And this is a chronic problem, and I am thrilled that you have a Supreme Court justice writing about that and even having a book coming out next year on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing I would say is that it's much deeper than civics education. Our students are not being educated at all. Most of them can't even read.
Yeah.
So you can't really expect them to understand physics when they can't read.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a huge problem in this country, and it's pretty unforgivable given everything that we have access to as a nation. And we just need to be very, very intentional about who we allow in the classroom with our children from now on. And I think every state needs to start being very, very particular about the teachers they certify, because we are failing our students. And it isn't just civics. It's just in every single metric imaginable.
Liberty, you've written a booklet on education crisis. And so you recognize this as well.
I do. You know, I think this is one of the reasons, as you pointed out, Keisha, unfortunately, so many children are being failed in the public school system. And so, I mean, even in my Facebook group for the town that I live in, I see people post every single day, I'm pulling my kid out and I'm starting to homeschool. I need resources. And you're seeing a resurgence in homeschooling, classical education. And so on the point of civics specifically, I did want to point out that I think we miss so much when we don't intentionally study our history. We don't know who we are as a nation. And you have, I think, you know, depending on your personal tendency, we can tend to kind of glamorize the past or just say we don't need the past because we're so much more progressed and evolved now. We don't need to look at it. And so this is actually a quote I read the other day, and I just thought it fit in so well. This is from Samuel James, and I read him on Substack. But he was talking about classical education specifically, and he said, when we look into the past out of wisdom rather than foolishness, we don't ask, why are the former days better than these, but how are the former days like these? And there is so much wisdom our culture could glean by realizing that human nature really is the same over time. And so we tend to think we're so much better than the past, and we may have different issues, but that we're dealing with. But human nature hasn't changed, and there's just a lot of arrogance, I think, today in people cutting out civics education, not teaching history, even in college programs. They're cutting those things out. And as you mentioned, Keisha, even if a kid wanted to pick up a historical textbook and read it, then they might struggle with it because they've been failed in so many other ways. But I'm glad that Gorsuch is highlighting this because it is so important.
By the way, the book that will be coming out next year is called Heroes of 1776, the story of the Declaration of Independence. And it gets into the Declaration. Of course, we are in the 250th anniversary since the Declaration of Independence, so I thought that was good. And I was also encouraged to hear him say that one thing my colleagues and I really agree on, it's kind of hard to get the Supreme Court to agree on much of anything, although we've had a few 9-0 decisions, but not many, is the importance of bringing civic education to our children. And mentioned the fact that he's published some other books on Overruled, The Human Toll on Too Much Law, then even quotes Sonia Sotomayor and some others, Amy Coney Barrett. And it does seem to me that if nothing else, Keisha, this is just a good year to really begin to talk about the nation's founding, its history, and anybody that thinks, well, we're much smarter than they are. One of my booklets is on the Federalist Papers. Just try to read through Federalist Paper number 10 and see if you can get it on the first read. And I think most people go, these people were really smart. And this is something that I think shows how dumbed down the education has become.
Yeah, and I think it shows where you have people throwing around terms like Hitler and Nazi, and because they don't understand it. I mean, they don't understand that they are susceptible to the exact same brainwashing that made the Germans put Hitler in power in the first place. We are no different than those people. The only difference is our level of education, our access to freedom, our access to a constitution. But the moment we become people who can just be spoon-fed information and controlled, we are susceptible to that same kind of control and that same kind of tyranny.
I wonder about the technology. One of the things, Liberty, you and I talk about is the influence of the smartphone. But let me go back a generation, since I'm the old guy around the table, because I remember a time when there were young people saying, why do I need to learn the multiplication tables? Because I have a calculator. Mm-hmm. You have now seen, why do I need to learn history? Why do I need to learn any of these facts or these dates or these individuals? Because I have Google, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, on a very practical level, I think people need to, I used to tell my students this when I taught middle schoolers. I would have everybody take turns during every class looking up words in a dictionary. A lot of them had never held an old-fashioned dictionary before. And I would say, what if you lose your phone? What if the internet goes down someday? This is just, one of those, and they probably thought I was an old fuddy-duddy, but I was just like, you need these practical skills. But on a deeper level, in fact, there were several studies that just came out, which I think a lot of teachers probably already knew this. When you take notes by hand, you actually learn more than when you type notes on a laptop.
Yes.
I think it's the same thing with doing math problems by hand instead of using a calculator. It's the point isn't just can I get the right answer, is how am I forming my brain right now and how am I exercising that muscle? And it's going to help you be able to learn so many more things in the future. So it's just that process of growing your brain. And unfortunately, with the digital technology that is in so many classrooms, students are just being shortchanged in that process.
Yes, and I'm afraid that some of them are using AI to write their papers. Then the teachers are using AI to grade the papers, and it's just gotten out of hand.
Why don't we just have the computers in school, and why don't we just stay home?
That's right.
Unfortunately, that's kind of how it is.
Well, Chapter 9 in your book is Liberate Education. Can you give us some other ideas on what we can do? Because as a former teacher and an individual that's been looking at all these religious liberty cases in school, I'm sure you've got some thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a number of ways to do this, and part of it is that you don't just rely on public schools to teach kids. Like, as parents, you kind of have to take the bull by the horns and access information a lot of times through homeschools, where you can teach kids things that they're not learning in public education. I do think private schools are important, charter schools are important, magnet schools are important, and it creates a level of competition for public schools because then they have to compete with the schools that are actually teaching kids the things parents want their students to know. So I think access to education is really important, what Betsy DeVos calls educational freedom, I believe, and I think that's really important right now, especially, but I think a lot of conservatives will say, we'll just get rid of public schools. That's not going to happen. We are never going to get rid of public schools. And so we just need to take them back. And that's just the bottom line.
So again, one of the other things, of course, you write about Liberty is homeschools. And as you just pointed out, there has been a remarkable increase in the number of parents that have said, okay, I'll bite the bullet. I'm not sure I'm a teacher, but I'm pretty sure I can do a better job at home than what's going on in the public schools down the street.
Yeah, I think a lot of the spike you saw, it was accelerated in the pandemic for sure, because so many parents saw what their kids were actually learning. And there's a podcast series on just like the difference in how people are teaching kids how to read. And a lot of parents during the pandemic, when they were, watching the laptop school with their children, realized my child can't actually read. He memorized this book at home or at school, brought it home. I saw him read it. I thought he could read, but he can't. And so there's so many things like that, just academically. And then, of course, with ideology that students come across in public school. And so there are more resources, I think, than ever, and more people taking that step than ever. There are all kinds of resources available for homeschooling parents, whether or not you're working, whether you've ever done it before. And so it's a great time if you want to explore that option.
So again, let's take a break, and we come back. I want to get into, of course, the whole decision being made by Zohran Mamdani. In about half an hour from now, he's going to be meeting with President Donald Trump. We have no idea how that's going to go. But even today, there was a up or down vote on a particular piece of legislation to condemn the horrors of socialism. And 127 Democrats refused to vote to condemn the horrors of socialism, which is amazing. That'd be 98 that voted against it, and another, how many? I guess it was 27 that did not vote. And anyway, it's just an incredible number. But one of the things I wanted to bring up is that indeed Zohran Mamdani is going to be meeting with the president, but he was talking about the fact that we now want to declare the city of New York under international law. I wanted to ask our lawyer about that for sure, and we'll get into that right after these important messages.
At Point of View, we believe there is power in prayer, and that is why we have relaunched our Pray for America campaign, a series of weekly emails to unite Americans in prayer for our nation. Imagine if hundreds of thousands of Americans started praying intentionally together on a weekly basis. You can help make that a reality by subscribing to our Pray for America emails. Just go to pointofview.net and click on the Pray for America banner that's right there on the homepage. Each week you'll receive a brief news update, a specific prayer guide, and a free resource to equip you in further action. We encourage you to not only pray with us each week, but to share these prayers and the resources with others in your life. Join the movement today. Visit pointofview.net and click on the banner Pray for America right there at the top. That's pointofview.net. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in our land. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Keisha Russell and Liberty McArtor with us. And if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. But let me just mention that next article gets us into some of the discussion about not only the fact that we have a Muslim Marxist mayor in New York City, but we also have a Marxist or socialist mayor in Seattle, Washington. And more to come, by the way. And I think this article by Amy Curtis is kind of getting us thinking about that. In about a half an hour, the president will be meeting with the newly elected and soon to serve mayor of New York City, and we'll see how that unfolds. Probably be talking about that on Monday. And I think I might also just mention we will get to, for example, the proposed peace plan between Russia and Ukraine and a couple of other issues that we sort of set aside for today. But this one I thought would be of interest because, again, Zohran Mamdani declared just the other day in an interview interview, he wants to make New York City a city of international law. And he somehow thinks that that will give him the authority to then arrest Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for war crimes if he ever sets foot in the Big Apple. That's probably not going to happen, but it is, I think, opening up the idea that you're starting to see, Keisha, more and more individuals talking about, well, maybe we don't want to keep using constitutional law. My July issue was on Sharia law, and that's kind of becoming an issue here in the state of Texas. Zalran Mamdani's talking about international law. And so some people might say, well, what's the problem with all that? Help us out.
Well, the Constitution is the governing authority in the United States, not international law. Mamdani is subject to those rules, including New York law and whatever the New York legislative branches have decided. But so he can't enforce the ICC. The only reason why he wants to do this, I'm just going to get to the point, is because he hates Israelis and he hates Jewish people. And he wants to use his power as a means of enforcing his hate for them in the city of New York. And that's just the bottom line. He would not condemn Hamas. I don't know what kind of leader wouldn't do that when they're clearly a very vicious terrorist organization. And there's no excuse for even trying to justify what they did on October 7th. And so that's Mamdani. That's what's going on there. And I feel like I'm hoping that the people in New York will learn their lesson because I do feel like sometimes people have to see it get really bad in order for them to understand. And I think that's what happened during the Biden administration. People saw and then they decided, I don't want this. I'm going back to Donald Trump. And so I'm hoping that's what happens there, where people would see exactly what his motives are. And no matter how much he smiles or appears charming, they will see that he is not here to further the values of America.
Well, and again, George Will said that a while back in an interview he did with Bill Maher. He says, maybe we just need to elect him so that everybody will see what it ends up being, and that might be the case. But, Liberty, what about this? Because a lot of the vote, matter of fact, the vote today on the issue of socialism brings us back to a booklet that is coming out soon on the road to serfdom. And you have a chapter, Keisha, of course, on the road to tyranny. But it does seem to me that the younger generation right now doesn't have the concern about socialism that the older generation does. They did not live through the Cold War. And the most recent Gallup poll shows as much as 39% of Americans have a favorable view toward socialism. So one of the reasons we're going to be talking about socialism a lot this next year is because we need to do some education.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's important for people to be aware, too, that the political party that Mamdani is a part of is Democratic Socialists of America. And they are putting forward more and more candidates around the nation and kind of being subject to international laws is part of their platform. And so this is something that they are specifically advocating for, is more of this globalist government. And so I think you have among young people kind of two extremes that we're starting to see. There is a lot of frustration with just the state of the world and the economy. And so people tend to look for something that is going to be the grand answer. And so on the one side, you have a lot of people who are, again, inexperienced, as you said, and looking at socialism. And they think that, somehow we can have some sort of human global unity and utopia. And what that is actually going to do is the road to international tyranny, where you have a small group of powerful ideologues in charge with no concern or care for local governments, local cultures, or people's actual interests or needs, and just tyrannizing everybody around the globe. And that's what that will move toward. On the other side, you have kind of a resurgence of populism and nationalism and that concern for national sovereignty. So this is, what they are advocating for, and it's definitely concerning.
One of the things I thought Keisha might get into is a second article here gets into Barack Obama pushing for a global movement to restrict free speech, and even talked about the idea of government regulatory constraints on media and journalism. Okay, there's a real problem with that in the United States called the First Amendment. But if you've been following at all what's going on in Europe, it does seem that there is a solution that is being proposed, and that is not allowing everybody to express their views choose and to actually have the government decide what is acceptable speech and what is threatening speech and hate speech and unacceptable speech, and thus ones that need to be clarified or even shut down.
I mean, I can't think of anything more dangerous. It's definitely the first path to tyranny is to have the government controlling all the information you get. It's where you get propaganda. It's how you are miseducated and forced to believe that things are good for you when they really aren't, like socialism. Okay, so these are the kinds of things that happen when the government controls the message. And so you have to have independent media. You have to have people who are watching the government and sharing with the public what the government is doing so that the public can correct it in their vote. And when you have the government controlling that message, they make sure that everything you think and hear about the government is positive. And so you have something like China, right, where people who have independent minds are not allowed to function. The only religion that's allowed to take place in China are the ones that the government approves of, the one that the government controls the messaging and all the leaders. And if you're not, you're considered an underground church. You're considered a criminal. And so they round you up and put you in some sort of camp. And that can easily happen in America. I don't think people should take it for granted that we are a free nation, because the moment we stop fighting for it is the moment we will lose it.
One of the insights in your book, and there are many, is the fact that tyranny affects your conscience. And you have a whole chapter on that. And that's one of the reasons why we have this booklet as well, because this is based upon a book which had, of course, the very arresting title, Road to Serfdom, written by Friedrich Hayek. Now, I hate to admit it, but when you say Friedrich Hayek, some people think, is that the father of Selma Hayek? They don't even know who he is. But one of the points he makes in The Road to Serfdom, and you, of course, quote from 1984, but both books illustrate the fact that once you live in a society which allows tyranny, the conscience begins to shrink. You begin to recognize that maybe I need just to keep my head down, and it really affects people from the outside in. So it isn't just that you lose your freedom, is that you create just a sort of subservient race of individuals. And you talk about that in your book. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to at least give people the Cliff Notes version to The Road to Serfdom, because that's, I think, one of the greatest dangers of any kind of authoritarian or totalitarian rule. And we saw a little bit of it even during the Biden administration, didn't we?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of cracking down on Christians and Catholics during the Biden administration, people who would not allow him to usurp the authority of other branches of government in order to accomplish his ends, which is exactly what he did for the entire time he was in the presidency. And I think when you evaluate the impact it has on people, when the government starts to, terrorize the people, when the government starts to essentially punish you for being a Christian or punish you for having a conscience, then people who have that conscience no longer want to talk about it or promote their ideas because they're afraid, and so that is why, tyranny sears the conscience. It makes you unable to tap into those things that are good because you're too afraid to do it. And that's what happens when you have governments that overreach, when you have a tyrannical regime. They try to silence you or put you, take away your ability to even feel that way anymore. And so you start to look at people who violate the government's laws just like the government does, that
Yes.
they don't deserve to be treated in the hospital because they didn't get a vaccine. You remember that?
Oh, I do.
Those kinds of beliefs is how the government does it. They will say, well, you shouldn't talk to your family. You shouldn't go to your family's house for Thanksgiving because they didn't get vaccinated and they're conservatives. And God help you if you start to, acknowledge or even associate with your own family. Mm-hmm. This is searing the conscience of people. That's exactly what it is. So
Yeah.
I won't go on because.
But again, I got two
Well
chapters on that, and it's a really well-written piece, and it's just a reminder of what we're up against. And, of course, the other way they can control you is with the money. They're talking about the central bank digital currency, and now they're ready for basically a digital euro. And so sleep well, America. You live in America. Can you imagine what it's going to be like in Europe if they can control the money? You control the money, you control the society. Let's take a break. We're going to get into some other issues right after these important messages.
I still have most of the Halloween candy I bought this year. We live within walking distance of 3 public schools, but where are the kids? Very few are in our neighborhood trick-or-treating. In fact, not many families with young children live here anymore. This is partially on us. According to a recent CNN report, fewer homeowners selling is part of what is keeping the inventory of homes historically low and pushing prices ever higher in markets across the U.S. Empty nesters own more home than they need, while millennials with kids can't find or afford homes that can reasonably accommodate a family. Some baby boomers who are not selling their family homes say they need the space to host their adult children and grandchildren. That's us. Others would like to downsize but can't find what they need or don't think a smaller space is worth the money they'd have to spend. Capital gains taxes are keeping millions of homes off the market. A third of homeowners have made enough on their homes that they'd owe federal taxes if they sold. They're staying put so their heirs can inherit the property with a stepped-up tax basis and avoid capital gains. A Washington Post article states that empty nesters' economics are creating a market-wide logjam. Jim Parrott of the Urban Institute writes, "A scarcity of available housing in high-growth job markets means fewer workers could relocate to areas with greater opportunity, leaving jobs unfilled and underemployed workers stuck in the wrong places. Building more small homes would help." Realtor.com laments the death of the starter home. They point out that builders find it more lucrative to put up larger homes. So millennials, urban renters, downsizing boomers, and investors are vying for the dwindling supply of smaller houses. This lack of housing serves as a deterrent to family formation and growth. We want young adults to marry and have children. They'll need suitable homes to live in. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let's, if we can, focus on another issue. And one of the articles I've posted comes from a reporting of what has been happening right now, and that is Agricultural Secretary Brooke Rollins. She's a Texas A&M graduate and was here at the Texas Public Policy Institute for quite some time, and now is the Secretary of Agriculture. Reports, and you can't believe these numbers. 500,000 people, 500,000 people are registered twice for SNAP. Now, what's SNAP? Well, that's Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which oftentimes has been referred to as food stamps. Then another 5,000 deceased people have been receiving benefits. And I didn't know that people who died 8, but apparently that is the case. If you are thinking, what in the world? First of all, let me hold up a book. We don't have Dr. Merrill Matthews with us, but he wrote this book a while back, America Faces the Entitlement Cliff. And there's whole sections here about the graft and fraud in housing and urban development, in Medicare, Medicaid, in food stamps. I mean, it just goes on and on. It just makes you so frustrated. And then you had Elon Musk trying to see if we could at least root out some waste, fraud, and abuse. And the pushback was enormous, but it illustrates again, Liberty, that when you have 5,000 dead people getting benefits and another 500,000 receiving benefits twice, the system is not working.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, those numbers are kind of hard for me to believe. And yet, as we have seen just demonstrated so many times, especially in the most recent Trump administration, there is so much waste. It's almost like a federal government isn't doing a very good job of managing, millions of people and their details. But this does need to be corrected. And so, I'm glad it's being highlighted. It's crazy, though. Like, that's just so much that, and where is it going?
Yeah.
Like, who's receiving the benefits?
Well, somebody is. And she refers to it as the most corrupt, dysfunctional program in history, which is saying something given all the corruption we've seen in Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. But, Keisha, somebody needs to call their office. This one needs to be fixed.
Well, and unfortunately, it's like one of those inefficient government programs that is so difficult to, people need to, really sit down and look at what's going on. But it really just promotes a sense of entitlement for people. I mean, you saw sort of the people going crazy during the government shutdown, saying they were going to steal food and stuff. And your next question is, do you work? Because the rest of us have to work if we want to eat. So yeah. I don't know why you think that you're just entitled for the government to to feed you. But that's the problem. If the government feeds you, they can starve you too.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why conservatives don't believe that the government should have that much power. And hopefully, at least there are a few people that might understand that now that they've gone through this.
Yeah. Well, and one of the reasons I brought it up is when we did the shutdown, we began to hear about we're having this looming crisis with SNAP, and that caused a number of people. Cal Thomas, for example, we had his piece where he says, okay, we got 42 million people that receive some kind of food assistance. That's 1 in 8, more than 12%. They receive an average of $190 a month or more, some receiving twice that, we now have found out. And many of those individuals, and that's the other part of that, are, as you point out, Keisha, able-bodied individuals. Now, there are all sorts of disclaimers that there if you have to take care of an aging parent, if you have children, if you're pregnant. So I recognize we don't want to hurt people that have no ability. But I think the philosophy has always been that the American people are generous, and they're always willing to give a person a hand up to get them out of a circumstance. But they're not real thrilled about giving people a hand out and having total dependency on the government.
Well, that's the situation, right? I think these benefits are great when they're used the way they're supposed to. So you're going through a hard time, you've lost your job, maybe you need that help for 6 months or 9 months or something. But some of these people have been on benefits for like 20 years. You can get a job that can pay you enough to feed yourself in 20 years. Then something's wrong with that. It's not meant to be something that's supposed to carry you through life. It's just supposed to carry you from one hard point to you getting out of it, and that's it.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. It should be a temporary relief. And I know people in my personal life, and even in my family, who through hard times and hard seasons have relied on government assistance like this in the process of going to school so that they could get a certain, job and provide for their kids in the meantime, or because they had lost a job and then they were working to quickly get employed as soon as possible. And so I think, we talk a lot as conservatives about how the church should be meeting the needs of the poor in our local communities. And I think that's true, but also just an encouragement for local churches to, in addition to having food pantries and assistance like this, which were so needed during the shutdown because so many people had been relying on SNAP, but also, encourage and offer assistance in terms of resume building and, practical skills. And a lot of people, they may not have ever had those opportunities or had anybody mentor them and say, hey, let's go out and be successful and get a job. And so those things can actually really be helpful in getting somebody a hand up so that they can then go out and provide for themselves.
One of the things that I thought I might mention, even though Liberty was a little bit shocked at those numbers, those probably pale in comparison, because one of the things that the Agricultural Secretary Brooke Rollins points out is they found massive fraud, but they only found it in the states that reported it. And there's 21 states that did not report that. So if my math is right, that means we have 29 states from which we have these statistics, but almost as many other states, and I suspect some of them are the very populous states like California, New York, Illinois, and others, where we didn't even have that. And here gets into another issue, Keisha, and that is these states and their governors refuse to hand over SNAP data to the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, and apparently have refused to also hand that over to the Department of Agriculture. And it does seem to me that if the federal government is paying these benefits, at the very least, the states should be providing the information about the benefits, right?
Well, they're just, tap dancing and trying to make it seem like they're resisting something that doesn't need to be resisted. The bottom line is if you have a large part of your citizenry that relies on SNAP benefits, something is wrong in your state.
Yes.
And you need to fix it. That's not something you need to be proud of. It's something you need to fix.
Yeah.
Well, again, Scott Turner is a good friend of this ministry. And of course, we've had him on before, and he's the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, served under Ben Carson. And someone the other day was complaining about one of his housing policies, and he simply said, look, we see these policies like a trampoline. Yeah, you can bounce on it, and then you can bounce back. And I thought that was another illustration, whether it's a handout or a hand up. He's just trying to say, we recognize that some people get themselves in difficult situations. concerns. And whether it's housing, we're going to be talking about how homelessness next week, whether it's about SNAP benefits and talking about what various food banks and others can do, there's just a problem with once there is this federal gravy train, people just get used to it. And that level of dependency, I think, is really of some concern. So anyway, I just wanted you to see those numbers. And as Liberty said, I can't believe it's 500,000. I can't either. It's probably 1 million because we have only heard from about half of the states. And that, wow, I think, illustrates again how very corrupt some of these systems are and why even with or without DOGE, I think it was worth mentioning before this week is out, because we're going to put the shutdown into the rear view mirror. But nevertheless, it has made some very significant impacts, which we've talked about here in terms of the economy. Let's take a break, though. When we come back, very good piece by Jenna Ellis, Real Conservatism, Pursuing What God Ordained. There's some individuals, especially the younger generation, since I have some members of the younger generation here, have sort of rejected what's going on with conservatism, but maybe they're rejecting the wrong things. We'll talk about that right after these important messages.
It was not that long ago that censorship appeared to be almost inevitable. Free speech was being attacked and strangled in many places. And some of us wondered if this was the end. But now, many feel a new sense of hope, a chance for a fresh dawn. Let me caution you, now is not the time to relax. It's a time to press forward, to use this fresh opportunity to proclaim and learn how to apply truth to current issues. By the fact you're here, listening right now, that tells me that you recognize the vital role Point of View plays as a voice of truth. For more than 50 years, we've informed and equipped people who have made a real difference. And when you give to Point of View today, you breathe life into what can be a new golden era for the truth. Please, take a moment right now and invest in truth. Visit pointofview.net or give it 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net. Click in now or call 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, and let me just mention that in studio today, Liberty McArtor as well as Keisha Russell. We'll get back to some of the articles. Matter of fact, one that we've posted by Jenna Ellis, which I first heard about from Tim Wildman, and it's one that we'll probably deal with in some detail. But I thought just for a minute, as you are heading towards next week, which is Thanksgiving week, sometimes you don't want to get talking about these issues around the Thanksgiving table, but sometimes they come up anyway. Now, if you have a young person that is coming home from college and absolutely convinced that socialism is the answer to all the problems that we have in the economy. As I mentioned earlier in the week, you can go to our website, pointofview.net, and you can use a search. Just go to the bottom there. There's a place where you can search. You can type in socialism booklet, and up pops a place where you can get a PDF of that. We also have one, you could type in capitalism and socialism. You can download that as well. I just mentioned one for those of you that are a part of our truth team that we'll be getting very shortly, The Road to Serfdom, which is, I think, a very good critique that came from Friedrich Hayek about socialism. But another resource that I wanted to mention is this piece by Liberty McArtor on chemical abortion. You're going to run into more and more young people, especially young girls, that are thinking, well, if I have a problem with a pregnancy, I don't even have to think about going to an abortion clinic. I can just order those online. I don't even need a doctor visit for this. And so this booklet is available. You can type in chemical abortion booklet. Go back to March. You'll be able to find it there. But I thought just for a minute, since we do have Liberty here, we sometimes talk about you when you're not on the air. And one of those is I did an interview with the people that are associated with a pro-life group, and they had found that this particular study that was done looked at just an enormous number of individuals that, interestingly enough, were likely voters, and found that 7 in 10 of likely voters, including a majority of liberal voters, actually believe that you should require a doctor visit prior to receiving a prescription for an abortion drug. Now, we're against abortion already, but even on the other argument, even people that are liberal, even people that tend to be sort of pro-choice, still say this doesn't make any sense not to have a doctor involved. If this drug was any other drug other than a drug related to abortion, I think there would be people screaming about that. But Liberty, explain why in your booklet we think, indeed, a doctor should be present.
Well, for years, that was the requirement because of how dangerous the side effects of the abortion pill can be. What people may not realize is that there is actually more chance for complication even than surgical abortion. And so it's kind of important to just combat the lie that you hear so often from the pro-choice movement that this is good for women. Teen girls are often told it's just as safe as taking a Tylenol. Well, the abortion pill won't even work. And again, we don't want it to work. We don't want it to end the life of the unborn child, but it won't even do so effectively if you are past around 10 weeks of pregnancy. There is no way outside of an in-person doctor visit to confirm how far along the woman is, whether or not she's experiencing an ectopic pregnancy, which can be deadly, and many other things, just to, look at her overall health and see, is she even eligible for this? What we're seeing now, what that restriction of having to be see an in-person doctor was lifted during COVID. And of course, the restriction was not put back in place. And so now what we're seeing is abortion pills just being mailed, often disguised. And we've talked to leaders of the pro-life movement and who say that they have girls come in who have oftentimes been given multiple abortion pills. There's no way to verify also without an in-person visit if this woman is even seeking this for herself. Oftentimes they are being forced to take them, or they are being sneaked into their food or drink, things like that. They're real things that have happened. So it is just in the interest of women to be seeing a doctor in person for something like this. It's in the interest of women to not be getting abortions at all. But it is just such a blatant lie that this is something that is safe, and it's not harming women. It is harming so many women.
Yeah, I think it sort of goes along with the idea that you shouldn't tell women about the possible psychological impact of having an abortion, which I knew several people who had one during the course of my life, and they all were depressed and very upset about it afterwards. And, I think when you listen to what's going on in the culture, you think, oh, it's such a liberating thing. And you'll have people saying that women are empowered and they should be doing this. But in reality, most of the women are torn up mentally and from what you're saying, also physically. Yeah.
I mean, it's so dangerous. It's heartbreaking, and women are being lied to. So again, even for people who are pro-choice, I think it is common sense that at the very least, women need to be seeing a doctor before they're prescribed any sort of pill during pregnancy.
When a couple others that came out of that survey, they found 80% of the voters, again, these are likely voters, including a majority of liberal voters, agree that no one should be able to get abortion drugs online or from a foreign country. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that gets into the issue of drug poisoning. Yeah. Dr. Merrill Matthews, I mentioned him a couple of times now, but when he's been on here before, because he's looked at some of these drugs that come overseas, either they're placebos, which would be they're not working, which might be a good thing, or they are sometimes laced with fentanyl or a variety of other issues. So you had 80% agreeing with that. An even larger percent, 90%, approve of the FDA drug labels accurately reporting the real world impact. Because again, if I can cite your booklet, you talk about the fact that ER visits have increased, 500% since 2002 over chemical abortions. 1 in 5 women who take abortion pills will experience so much bleeding that it will require medical attention. And so again, you got 90% of the people in these surveys agreeing that at least the FDA should report bleeding, sepsis, complications, infections, and everything else. And then on our interview the other day, we also had 2/3 agree with the fact that abortion pills might be actually used by an abuser to cover up rape, exploitation, human trafficking.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, this is happening, and they are given to women or, again, teenage girls who order them secretly, and they are left alone to deal with it. Many times they are a lot farther along than they realize. And the unborn child, the fetus, is recognizable as a human being at that stage. And then they are often traumatized because this is not that they were lied to about what it was. They are not prepared for what happens to their bodies and what they see. So it's very sad, and this is why we need to be so vocal about the truth behind the abortion pill. So I encourage people to read that because it is something that's affecting probably young girls that you know.
And again, this is the booklet. And of course, you could order them, but we've made it very easy for you. Just get a PDF of it. I don't know how you could be at a pregnancy resource center and not have these booklets available, because a lot of young girls today think, well, I don't need to go to a doctor. I don't need to go to an abortion clinic. Maybe I just need to have somebody do a sonogram, make sure I am pregnant, and then I can just take these pills and there will be no problem. But that's not the case. And this booklet is something you probably want to put in the hands of a lot of young women that are abortion-minded and think that abortion is the only solution, and it's not, as Keisha mentioned just a minute ago. Anyway, I just thought they'd drop that in. We talked about it earlier in the week. We have information about that on the website, and if we can put it in your hands, we'd be glad to do so. Let's take a break, though. We'll come back and talk about this very good piece by Jenna Ellis, and she is a broadcaster on American Family Radio. We'll talk about her right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
On my radio program the other day, I provided a good news, bad news story. The good news is the youngest generations, that would be millennials and Gen Z, are reading the Bible. The bad news is they don't always believe what they are reading is accurate. The statistics come from the State of the Church Initiative and were recently reported by Leonardo Blair in the Christian Post. Interviews with over 12,000 were conducted online. They discovered that approximately 50% of self-identified Christians report reading the Bible weekly. This is the highest level of Bible reading among Christians in more than a decade. Dave Kinnaman is the CEO of Barna Group and has observed that people aren't just curious about faith, they're opening Scripture for themselves. This trend aligns with other signs of renewal, which we've seen in our research, like growing commitments to Jesus and increased church attendance. Women traditionally have been more likely to read the Bible weekly, but the latest data shows that more younger men are reading the Bible than younger women. It's also worth mentioning that nearly 40% of young adult Gen Z women now identify as religiously unaffiliated. While we can applaud the fact that so many are reading the Bible, we must also deal with the fact that fewer maintain that the Bible is 100% accurate. 25 years ago, 43% of Americans thought the Bible was completely accurate. Today, that percentage has slipped to 36%. Even among self-identified Christians, less than half strongly affirm the accuracy of the Bible. This disconnect illustrates why we not only need to teach the Bible, but we need to teach Christians why it is true by pointing to an abundance of evidence that confirms the Bible. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, one of the other articles we posted here, been hearing about this. Tim Wildman contacted me the other day, and Jenna Ellis, who of course does broadcasts with American Family Association, American Family Radio, had written a piece, and now this appeared in Town Hall, so you can read it, and it's entitled Real Conservatism, Pursuing What God Ordained. And this really kind of relates to some of the conversation that Liberty, I know you and Keisha and others have, and that is there seems to be a little bit of a break between kind of the old school conservatism and the newer conservatives, and in some respects, people that have bridged the gap. As she mentions, for example, Charlie Kirk and others, but there are some that are maybe reacting because, as she says, there is in the new right, a deep and growing distrust of American institutions, and that is certainly the case. The younger that you are, the less likely you are to be positive about institutions, government, church, whatever. Got that. But she points out that really they're reacting against the failure of man-made institutions and, in a sense, are focusing on the wrong issue. The problem is the wrong institutions, not the God-ordained institutions. And I thought it was very helpful because you are seeing this gap. I go to some of these events, and I see some of the younger ones that are very libertarian, they're very anti-principles. When you bring up maybe Reagan conservatism, go, oh, that worked in the 80s, but it doesn't work now. And then maybe there's a little bit more of Charlie Kirk tapping into that sort of anti-institution bias. But I thought this piece really helped understand why sometimes the younger Republicans, you go to a young Republicans group and speak, sometimes they're not reacting the same way that the gray-haired Republicans did just a few weeks ago when you spoke and gave the same message. So I thought this was a very good piece in that regard.
Oh, yeah. I think you are seeing a lot of young people right now that are hungry for a type of order and moral structure because the world has become so chaotic. There is a lack of trust. And I think that's why you see a lot of people that are going back to the church. But you can't impose that moral order if you don't have the heart of it. If you can't, impose it from the outside in. It has to come from the inside out. And so you have to go back to those first principles of morality and realize that the institutions that God ordained and the moral order that he ordained is what causes human flourishing. And so if you are conservative, you have to be conserving something. And you're not conserving earthly institutions necessarily, but most importantly, the God-ordained ones. And so I think there is a hunger for that. But then at the same time, it's concerning to see that while a lot are going back to church and kind of seeking that, you also have a contingency that is rejecting that along with everything else. So it's an opportunity for us to kind of point to, hey, why did these things work? There was actually an underlying principle there.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because when I look at like the fruit that has come of Charlie Kirk's legacy, a lot of people, I've heard people criticizing him and saying he's not a Christian, but the fruit doesn't lie, right? And so if there's a statistical difference in people going to church, as a typical statistical difference in people buying the Bible, then you can see that this is a Christian who is exercising the power of God in their lives and changing the culture. And ultimately, I think that's what's going to do it. I think that's why so many young people now are identifying as Christians, because Charlie Kirk knew how to come down and just talk to these people, and show them Christianity can withstand the scrutiny. And I think the youth should be skeptical. I think they should test pretty much everything that comes in front of them, because that's their job. Because Christianity can withstand it. That Christianity is easy to uphold with reason and logic, and that's what Charlie Kirk showed them. And so I think that's what we have to do, is continue to talk to the youth in a way and reach those that are thirsty and hungry for truth, and they really want that information and knowledge. You're not going to get the ones who think God owes them an explanation ever, right? So you have to just go for the ones who really just want to hear and make their own decision, and they don't want to necessarily be force-fed by the culture.
So a lot of overlap between her article in which she talks about the three institutions that Scripture establishes: the church, tasked with proclaiming the truth; the family, the foundational unit of society; and then civil government, designed not to create rights but to secure pre-political rights endowed by our Creator. Reminded me of your chapters on fear God, honor the golden rule, live with purpose. There's a sense in which these come together, and in some respects, whether people get your book or whether they just read this article, maybe we just need to think about how to craft the message for the younger generation, don't you think?
Yeah, I think that's the key is, even I despise TikTok and social media in general, even though I recognize how powerful it is. You can get just one message out to millions of people, but if the message is wrong or if the message is contradictory to truth, then you have a big problem. And so I think as conservatives and as Christians, we need to learn how to master those art forms and be able to communicate with the youth on the level where they are so that we can start reaching them with the message of the truth.
I'm so grateful for what Megan is doing, and I know Liberty's doing that as well. And it just occurred to me that when she mentioned this idea of Charlie Kirk, you wrote a piece that is in the latest Outlook about the Charlie Kirk effect. If you also want to read another very good piece, just came out today by our friend John Stonestreet at Breakpoint about the effect of Charlie Kirk. We're seeing a significant number, and my article today even talks about a significant number of young people who are buying Bibles. And interesting enough, 50% of self-identified Christians report reading the Bible weekly. Some of those that are buying the Bibles are first-time Bible readers. So that's all good. And this is helpful for some of you women. Actually, more young men are reading the Bible and going to church than young women, which has never happened before. But, of course, my article today talks about the fact that they're reading the Bible, but they're not always believing it. But leaving that aside for a second, this whole Charlie Kirk effect, you've been writing about this, haven't you?
Yeah, and so, shortly after he was assassinated, I did a Know Why podcast episode on it as well. And I think that we can tend to immediately jump to, is this technically a revival? Or I didn't agree with everything Charlie Kirk said, and people have all these qualifications. And what I really encouraged in that episode and in the article and in conversations with people too is people are coming to church. You have young people who are hungry and they're seeking truth. Put all of your, I don't know if this is technically such and such, put all that aside and just step up and disciple somebody because they are seeking truth. Charlie Kirk was a huge voice for promoting these God-ordained institutions like family. And so I just encourage people to notice the new young family that is in your pew, and start, reaching out to them because they need mentors, they need discipleship, and, somebody that was a figure online or a big speaker or, conservative figure, somebody that maybe they saw on social media, that's amazing that his life and witness and legacy motivated them to go to church. But if they're really going to be mentored and discipled, they need somebody in person to do that. So just embrace the people who are seeking, and I think step up and disciple them is the biggest thing we can do right now.
Yeah, I love what you're saying, Liberty, because I think one of the things that can really build up the church and conservatism is realizing that so many young people were attracted to sort of the LGBTQ crowd because it provided a group, a sense of belonging. And I think when we start providing that to people who are seeking truth, and maybe they don't know everything, they're not perfect and they don't understand all of the things, but when we start bringing those people in and loving on them and showing them what we believe and what we value, I think we will have a really big influx of people coming back to the church.
Absolutely.
Well said. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, I do want to get into a couple other aspects of this article, and then we'll move on to some other topics. But also, as you go to the break, I did give you the facts and figures that came from this latest survey. It was called The State of the Church, in which they found, interestingly enough, 12,000, and again, I've done some interviews over the years working with George George Barna and with the Barna Research Group, that is a large group indeed of interviews. So I think you can go to the mat with those. And again, approximately 50% of self-identified Christians report reading the Bible weekly. Dave Kinnaman, who I've met before and had him on the program a couple of times, said people aren't just curious about the faith, but they're also opening scriptures for themselves. And this trend, he says, really fits into signs of renewal, which we'll get into maybe after the break, which we've seen in our research. And again, he said traditionally women have been most likely to read the Bible, but the latest data shows younger men are reading the Bible more than younger women. And one of the concerns, about 40% of young adult Gen Z women are the unaffiliated, the so-called nuns, not N-O-N-E-S, N-O-N-E-S, not N-U-N-S. And but all of that to bring to the key point that I make there, significant percentage of them still don't believe that the Bible is 100% accurate. So that brings us back to something we do every day here, talking about theology, apologetics, evidence for our faith. And so that's a good reason to support Point of View. But I want to get back to some of the other elements in this piece by Jenna Ellis. We'll talk about that right after these important messages.
Where does moral truth come from? According to 58% of Americans, individuals determine moral truth. A quarter of Generation Z says society determines moral truth, and morality can even change over time. Only 42% of Americans believe that truth comes from God. I don't know about you, but I find these numbers extremely troubling. It really is a crisis of truth, and that crisis has consequences. Look at society. Evil is called good, good called evil. People with biblical beliefs are called bigots, or worse, they're canceled. But there is hope. The Bible promises the truth will set us free, and that's why Point of View is relentless in our commitment to the ultimate source of moral truth, God's Word. At Point of View, we know that God's truth is eternal, and if we stand together, we can help more Americans apply His truth in their daily life. Help Americans find truth again by giving at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, and we are privileged to have in studio with us today Keisha Russell as well as Liberty McArtor. And Liberty, I thought I just might mention that the December issue, which probably is landing in people's mailboxes if it hasn't already, is on the subject of rumblings of revival. If you haven't received it, just be looking for it. And of course, there is one where I've written about the history of revivals. There's one where John Stonestreet has written, "Is this revival?" raising some questions, pulling from Jonathan Edwards, who was one of the first to actually have been part of the First Great Awakening, along with George Whitefield, and then your piece on our turning point. And I thought it was very powerful because it overlaps very much with the, if you will, third page here by Jenna Ellis on the issue of certainly Ronald Reagan succeeded not because he governed during the 1980s. He succeeded, she says, because his leadership aligned with timeless, transcendent principles that reflect the God-ordained institutions that actually matter. And then she goes on to say, and this precisely is why Charlie Kirk's appeal to young men resonated so strongly. And Reagan and Charlie Kirk tapped into the same truth. The principles that protect God's institutions are eternal, not antiquated. But you've written about this, and we got into a conversation the other day with Doug Groteis because he's written about revival and apologetics. I'll save that for a few minutes. But this whole idea of whether we're in the midst of revival, I'll leave that to historians a decade or two from now, but certainly some things are motivating us to begin to see some changes that we haven't seen in a long time. What have you found?
Oh, yeah. I've seen even at my home church, I often work in the nursery and the kids, and I've seen a lot of young families bringing babies, and that's so exciting, and a lot more young people in the pews. And so again, like you said, we probably won't know if this is technically a revival or not until, decades from now when we look back at the data. But again, I think there is a harvest coming in. I think that it would be exactly the wrong thing to start arguing about, whether or not it's a revival or getting, divided over whether or not we agree with the person who inspired it. And again, just focus on discipling the people who are coming in. One of the things that I actually was inspired to do on the Know Why podcast is a series on family formation. One of the things that I think Charlie Kirk did so well was affirm a lot of the frustrations that young people and especially young men had, but he didn't just allow them to wallow in it. He recognized that people need meaning. We have become such a self-absorbed culture where real people have been told that they can just be anything they want to be and they are autonomous. But he knew that you have to have meaning. You have to have connection with God. You need other people. You need those meaningful relationships. And that's why he was such a strong promoter of family. So, discipling the people who are coming in, explaining those things. Why do people flourish when they do certain things? It's not an accident. It's because God set it up that way. And he was really good at articulating that. And I think we need a lot of, other Charlie Kirks, so to speak, in the local churches to step up and kind of fill that void of speaking on these real practical issues that young people are asking about.
Yeah, we definitely need to take the mantle ourselves and not parse out the responsibility to other people. I think we all have a role to play in advancing the kingdom of God and making sure that those ideas are out there and everyone has a sphere of influence. And I try to encourage people in my book, like no matter what you do, even if you're a stay-at-home mom, you have kids coming to play at your house or you're doing the PTA thing or whatever, you have a sphere of influence and everyone can see when you are a believer and what you really value and how you treat people. And that's a responsibility that we all have, is to sort of make sure that we ourselves are demonstrating good fruit and not always worry about what other people are doing.
Oh, yeah. And, again, I think so many people after Charlie Kirk died were inspired to go to church, even if they hadn't before, because he openly lived as a Christian. And I think we have, like you were talking about, the effects of tyranny, even the effects of living in a culture where our beliefs aren't necessarily normal, can make us almost feel apologetic for them. Like, well, I'm going to be kind and, go to church and have my Bible study, but I'm not going to be very vocal in my neighborhood or at the PTA about the fact that I'm a Christian. And he was kind and articulate, but unapologetic about his beliefs. And people saw that, and then they said, I want that fruit in my life.
That's right.
And so we need to be bold, and I hope that people are still feeling emboldened because people are looking for models to look up to.
Yeah, I have just one of the girls I represented I talked about earlier. Her name is Sophia Shoemaker from Colorado, and she wanted to put scripture on her parking lot. She was told she couldn't do that. And she talked about the impact that Charlie Kirk had on her. 17-year-old girl, she said she watched him all the time, and he made her want to be a better Christian. He made her want to stick up for her faith. And that's the kind of fruit that I think we should all be looking for, is to be inspiring people to be better Christians. And she did. She stood up to her entire school district when I think even some adults would have a problem doing that. But she was so bold about it, and she was so sure and convicted because Charlie Kirk had helped ignite her conscience. Wow. And helped her see like the power of Christianity, the power of truth. And it changed. I'm sure it'll change her life. She'll never be the same.
Yeah.
One of the things I appreciate about your book is you talk about some of the people that showed uncommon courage, and a lot of them are young people. You think of the Kuntz cheerleaders. You think of the number of young girls that wanted to paint their parking situation. There's all sorts of other examples, and that's what's so intriguing about revivals. If I can give a history lesson, every revival was different. The First Great Awakening was pretty much professionals. It was Jonathan Edwards and George Whitefield, and George Whitefield's going up and down the eastern seaboard, and 3 out of every 4 colonists actually heard him preach, and it was like a Billy Graham crusade. You get the Second Great Awakening. That was really sort of the unprofessionals. Charles Finney, he was a lawyer. He wasn't even had a theological education, which may have hurt us in a few cases because he didn't know that. You go to the revival that took place place in New York City, that was all businessmen. The so-called prayer men's revival came from people in the business world during the Civil War. Well, those actually were people that were in the military. You can go to Azusa Street. That was probably one that was led by a very prominent African American. And then you go to even the Jesus Revolution. That was a student revival. So everyone was different. And I think it illustrates, again, you can't create these. These are a movement of the Holy Spirit. But the other thing I might just mention is they're always really messy, because a lot of people become Christians. And Keisha knows this, having gone to New York a number of times. Upstate New York is what's called the burnt over area, where they have these fires of revival come through, but they didn't have good teaching. And so a lot of the cults came out of that. So the other day when we were talking with Doug Groteis, he reminded us in Hosea 4:6, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Proverbs 29:18, where there's no revelation, people cast off restraint. Or, of course, a verse we use all the time, Colossians 2:8, see to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and empty or deceptive philosophy, which depends on human tradition and elementary spiritual forces rather than on Christ. There's going to be a need for what we do here at Point of View to teach good theology and really a good apologetics. And I'm thinking that's where social media might be an answer. We never had that before. This could be a revival that is spawned by social media. Your thoughts?
I think so. The Bible talks about going from milk to solid food, right? And I think when you're a young Christian, there are so many things you don't know and don't understand, which is why it's so dangerous when people start listening to people who claim to be Christians but are really not behaving like it, right? Like, I've been very grieved by what's going on with Candace Owens' podcast right now, and I think a lot of Christians and a lot of people who believe in what she did in the past are being taken away by it. But when you look at the fruit, you can tell this is not of God. And I think you have to be mature in your faith in order to be able to watch those things and to see those things. But that's why it takes all of us to come out here and say, look, this is what the word says. And anything that goes against this is not God. And that's it. And so we have to be very intentional about teaching people, but also, loving on them, of course, and helping to dispel these arguments in a way that's very accessible for the common person and for young people.
Very good. Well, those are the kind of things we're doing, and that's why we have a Know Why podcast, so that you not only know what you believe, but know why you believe, right?
Yeah, and so one of the things that I try to do is say, what's Gen Z asking about? What are they talking about? And again, this is no surprise for mature Christians, but so often what you find in terms of research or what's causing people to be happy or what's makes them flourish, it points back to principles that are in the Bible. And so we try to address those cultural issues, the things that Gen Z is talking about, and really dig into, hey, why does it work this way? Is it an accident, or is it because God designed it that way? So I encourage people to check out Know Why podcast.
And again, we have that link on the website. Let me just mention again, as you go to the website, you'll see my commentary. You'll see Penedexter's commentary, which if you're listening on computer, you'll hear in just a minute. We'll come back and talk about that. We have the video that Charlie Kirk gave at the Point of View 50th Anniversary Gala. And, of course, then if you scroll down, you'll see the Pray for America, the Spotify, and then, of course, all the information about the various podcasts there as well. So all of it available at the website, pointofview.net. We'll come back and talk about Penedexter's commentary right after this.
I still have most of the Halloween candy I bought this year. We live within walking distance of 3 public schools, but where are the kids? Very few are in our neighborhood trick-or-treating. In fact, not many families with young children live here anymore. This is partially on us. According to a recent CNN report, fewer homeowners selling is part of what is keeping the inventory of homes historically low and pushing prices ever higher in markets across the U.S. Empty nesters own more home than they need, while millennials with kids can't find or afford homes that can reasonably accommodate a family. Some baby boomers who are not selling their family homes say they need the space to host their adult children and grandchildren. That's us. Others would like to downsize but can't find what they need or don't think a smaller space is worth the money they'd have to spend. Capital gains taxes are keeping millions of homes off the market. A third of homeowners have made enough on their homes that they'd owe federal taxes if they sold. They're staying put so their heirs can inherit the property with a stepped-up tax basis and avoid capital gains. A Washington Post article states that empty nesters' economics are creating a market-wide logjam. Jim Parrott of the Urban Institute writes, "A scarcity of available housing in high-growth job markets means fewer workers could relocate to areas with greater opportunity, leaving jobs unfilled and underemployed workers stuck in the wrong places. Building more small homes would help." Realtor.com laments the death of the starter home. They point out that builders find it more lucrative to put up larger homes. So millennials, urban renters, downsizing boomers, and investors are vying for the dwindling supply of smaller houses. This lack of housing serves as a deterrent to family formation and growth. We want young adults to marry and have children. They'll need suitable homes to live in. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Penna Dexter is not with us, and we are saddened about that, but I'm going to get her back here sooner or later. She's so busy with grandchildren and all the other things that are going on, but her commentaries continue. Let me just mention again that my commentary comes to your inbox Monday through Friday. If you sign up for the Viewpoints commentary, hers will arrive on Saturday, although if you go right now, you'll see the one that she's written, Not Budging, which is all about what is happening with houses, and I think this fits very much with some of the conversation we've had with Liberty, but let me just get into it, because what we're finding is fewer homeowners are selling, in part because of the issue that when they purchased those homes, they were selling for less. Now they're selling more, and as a result, empty nesters that are thinking about maybe wanting to downsize. First of all, you got the capital gains issue, but also she doesn't talk about it, but in some other commentaries, I've talked about the fact that about 50% of so-called baby boomers have a significant amount of their assets in their home and nothing else. So, Liberty, this is a conversation we've had before because you have two issues. Number one, baby boomers sitting on these appreciating assets, homes, that maybe aren't going to sell. You have Generation Y and Z who are saying, we want to buy a house. And of course, one of our commentaries coming out is on affordability. Oh, I've heard that word a few times before. Mm-hmm. And so you've got two things happening simultaneously, and she's really talking about the fact that baby boomers who are not selling their family homes say they need the space to host their adult children, but then others would like to downsize, but there's a lot of things keeping them from it. One of those, capital gains tax, another is the economics isn't working for them any more than it's working for the younger generation.
Yeah, one of the things that America is facing, obviously, is the fertility crisis and more young adults not wanting to get married. Thankfully, there is a kind of a bump in interest in marriage among young men. Again, young men are starting to go to church more. And so if you want to, though, encourage more family formation, young families need places to raise their kids. They need enough room to have a family. And so I think because less older homes are available on the market, then that turns into, okay, well, we need to build new homes. And then you get into all sorts of policies. I know Senator Tim Scott put forth some legislation on kind of motivating cities to build some new homes. But there's a lot of loopholes there where cities can technically add a lot of addresses, but they're adding condos, they're adding apartments, who in many cities are actually sitting empty because, again, people want a modestly sized house on a moderately sized lot where they can have a few bedrooms and have a couple of kids in there. And so even some of the policies that are meant to incentivize cities to add more homes, they aren't really doing a good job of making sure they're adding the right kind of homes. And so there's a lot of frustration among young people who are just kind of giving up on that dream of ever being able to buy a house.
She does, in this piece, Penna Dexter mentioned the death of the starter home, and that's another aspect of that as well. I have this commentary where somebody was saying, the problem with it right now is you've got fiscal policies that are turning starter homes into lottery jackpots, and then you have to pay taxes. We're being taxed like a Rockefeller, but living like a medieval peasant who just found out the pigs have the plague, which was, a bit of hyperbole, but it is a problem. And one of the things, Keisha, that we found, and Liberty and I share stuff back and forth, this is no surprise, the fertility and loss of homes are related. In other words, the individuals that can't find a home also don't have children. And as you would probably intuitively guess that would be the case, I can statistically prove it to you, because if you want to start a family, starting a family in a rental home or in an apartment isn't as easy as starting a home in a home. And so there is a sense in which that is another problem with the fertility rate, isn't it?
Well, I think it's obvious because, well, the kind of young man who wants to get married and have families and stuff, they also want to be able to provide a proper home for them. And if they feel like they can't do that, I think they're less likely to have a family because they feel like they can't do what they need to do, like in their eyes. And so I think that makes a whole lot of sense. And I think affordability is absolutely an important thing. But I also think student loan crisis is probably part of it too. You've got some people who are paying $1,000, $1,500, $2,000 a month on loans. And so they're definitely not going to be able to afford a house.
Student loan debt, $1.7 trillion. Looked it up because I did it in a commentary, which is coming out in the future. And so when you are dealing with credit card debt, you're dealing with $38 trillion national debt. You're dealing with $1.7 trillion of student loan debt, and almost the same amount of credit card debt as well as car loan debt, all of them in the trillions, and some is 1.2, 1.5, 1.7, doesn't make any difference. More than $1 trillion in any one of those issues. Then to buy a home where you have to have at least 20 or 30% down, it's much easier. I'll take the one that's on the lowest list, Memphis, and it's much less likely in San Francisco, California. There's the range. And so you can see that it also varies from state to state and community to community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One thing that I read a while ago is that a lot of states or cities in Middle America are putting together incentive packages for young adults because it is a lot more affordable, and they are trying to provide all sorts of benefits and job offers and things like that to revitalize smaller communities in many places that have been overlooked, but also give young adults a chance to maybe have a home, get that starter home. So I think we obviously need to address these issues of the student loan debt, the economy, for the sake of young people and young families. And then in the meantime, I think in our churches, while we're discipling those young adults we've been talking about, also maybe help them reframe certain things, because historically, like we live in a time where we think we need so much in order to take the next step in life, when in reality that's not always the case. And I know that I have a lot of friends who have thought like that and say you can start a family with less, but you might have to get creative, and we might have to have some encouragement there to help people figure that out.
And I think even a lot of older people would tell you that, like, oh, when we first got married, we lived in this little shack apartment, and we had a kid, and then we had another kid, and we had to make it work until we could do, more. And I think a lot of young people now feel like they need to come out of the gate already living in like some mini mansion or something. And that's just not the way the life works for most of us.
Right. That's right. Just about out of time. First of all, if you go to firstliberty.org, under your picture there, it shows a picture of Gabriel Olivier. So we need to be praying for that particular oral arguments, which is December 3rd, and then the decision will come down sometime in 2026. Click on the other picture there of Liberty, McArtor, and it goes to knowwhypodcast.com. What's going on these days?
Well, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, we're doing a series on family formation, so that'll take us through the end of the year. And so, again, lots of encouragement, lots of good information for young adults, so check it out.
Let me just mention again that there are a couple of things that you might want to check out over the weekend. First of all, we have all these articles about the Mississippi evangelist and about civics education, international law, the issue of waste, fraud, and abuse with SNAP. This very good article by Jenna Ellis on real conservatism, as well as we do have information about Keisha's book, Uncommon Courage, and Penna Dexter's piece on not budging. If you click on See More Viewpoints, you'll see mine on Bible reading and and believing. So all of it is there. Also, don't forget that we do have ways in which you can listen to the podcast. I'm running into more and more people never even listen on radio. They just listen to your podcast. They listen on our Apple podcast, or I'm finding more and more going to Point of View highlights on Spotify, which Megan Kitchen does. So that's there. We have the Pray for America. So all sorts of buttons to click. And so I hope that you will take the time to go to the website, pointofview.net. And as I've pointed out before, 2 women on this side of the glass, 2 women on the other side of glass. And I want to thank both Megans, one engineering, one producing the program. Enjoy the weekend. We'll see you back here on Monday, right here on Point of View.
It was not that long ago that censorship appeared to be almost inevitable. Free speech was being attacked and strangled in many places. And some of us wondered if this was the end. But now, many feel a new sense of hope, a chance for a fresh dawn. Let me caution you, now is not the time to relax. It's a time to press forward, to use this fresh opportunity to proclaim and learn how to apply truth to current issues. By the fact you're here, listening right now, that tells me that you recognize the vital role Point of View plays as a voice of truth. For more than 50 years, we've informed and equipped people who have made a real difference. And when you give to Point of View today, you breathe life into what can be a new golden era for the truth. Please, take a moment right now and invest in truth. Visit pointofview.net or give it 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net. Click in now or call 1-800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.